On August 14, 1976, Grace Ann Delacroix checked into room 12 of the Saguaro Motor Court at mile marker 77 on Arizona State Route 89. She paid for 3 nights in advance. Cash. Signed the register in careful cursive. Asked the clerk if the pool was open past 8. At 7:43 the following morning, the maid knocked on her door. No answer. By noon, the manager used his passkey. The room was empty. Her suitcase sat open on the bed, clothes still folded. Her car keys lay on the nightstand next to a half-finished glass of water. Pima County Sheriff's Department ruled it a voluntary disappearance. Case closed in 11 days. But they never explained why her car was still parked in Space 12. They never explained the $300 in her wallet, untouched. And they never explained why the guest register showed room 12 had been rented to someone else the night before Grace Delacroix arrived. Someone whose name had been carefully torn from the page. Carl Hennessy found the case file in a cardboard box marked 1976 in his garage. 22 years of Arizona sun had yellowed the pages, but the typewritten words remained sharp. He spread the documents across his kitchen table, the same table where he'd written most of them. His wife had been dead 3 years now. His daughter called on Sundays, sometimes. He had time. Hennessy poured himself a cup of coffee and began reading his own words from another lifetime. The first discrepancy appeared on page 4. He'd noted it then, circled it in red pen that had faded to brown. The motel manager, a man named Dale Womack, had stated that Grace Delacroix checked in at approximately 4:30 in the afternoon. But the carbon copy of her registration card showed a timestamp of 2:17 p.m. Hennessy remembered asking Womack about the discrepancy. He remembered the answer, too. What he couldn't remember was why he'd accepted it. The photograph of Grace Delacroix had been clipped to the missing persons report. Black and white, probably taken from a driver's license. A woman in her mid-30s with unremarkable features, the kind of face that disappeared into a crowd. Hennessy had interviewed her sister in Phoenix 3 days after the disappearance. The sister's name was June. She'd told him Grace was driving to California to start over. Bad marriage, she'd said, needed distance. Hennessy found his notes from that interview. June Delacroix had been composed, almost rehearsed. She'd answered every question before he finished asking it. At the bottom of the page, in his own handwriting, he'd written, "Ask about husband, status unknown." He'd never followed up. The note had been crossed out, not by him. Different pen, different pressure. Someone else had edited his case file before it was closed. Hennessy drove out to mile marker 77 on a Tuesday morning. The Saguaro Motor Court was gone now, torn down in '84 to make room for a gas station that itself had closed in '92. What remained was a concrete slab, some rusted rebar, and a chain-link fence that served no purpose. He parked where the office would have been and walked the perimeter. The pool had been filled with dirt. Tumbleweeds had claimed it. Hennessy stood where room 12 once stood and tried to remember what it had looked like. Turquoise door, brass numbers. A window unit air conditioner that rattled. He'd searched that room himself, found nothing that explained anything. But standing there now, something bothered him. The layout. Room 12 had been at the end of the building, farthest from the office, farthest from the road. The only room you couldn't see from the parking lot. Dale Womack had died in 1981. Heart attack behind the counter of a hardware store in Tucson. Hennessy found the obituary in the library archives. Survived by a wife, Linda, and 2 sons. No mention of the Saguaro Motor Court. Hennessy tracked down Linda Womack to a retirement community in Mesa. She was 78 years old, hard of hearing, and suspicious of visitors. He told her he was writing a book about old Arizona motels. She let him in.
Dale never talked about that place. Not once in 20 years of marriage. Sold it in '77, right after that woman went missing. Said the desert was killing his lungs.
Hennessy asked who bought it.
Some company out of Phoenix. Dale dealt with a lawyer, never met the actual buyer. Got cash, too. Whole thing was strange, but we needed the money.
She didn't remember the lawyer's name. She did remember the amount. $40,000 for a 12-room motel that had been appraised at 18. The property records for the Saguaro Motor Court led Hennessy to the Pima County Assessor's Office. The sale had been recorded September 3rd, 1976, 18 days after Grace Delacroix disappeared. The buyer was listed as Southwest Hospitality Holdings, a corporation registered in Delaware. Hennessy spent 2 days trying to find out who owned it. Delaware corporations didn't have to disclose their principals. Dead end. He went back to the case file. There had been 3 other guests at the motel the night Grace Delacroix checked in. He'd interviewed all of them. A traveling salesman from Flagstaff, a retired couple from Minnesota, a truck driver hauling produce to Phoenix. All 3 had given statements. All 3 had seen nothing. Hennessy read the statements again. The salesman's interview was 2 pages. The couple's was 3. The truck driver's was half a page, 6 sentences. Hennessy had been thorough in '76. He wouldn't have accepted 6 sentences. The truck driver's name was Roy Bates. CDL records showed he'd kept his license active until 1992. After that, nothing. Hennessy found a Roy Bates in the Maricopa County phone book, same birth year as the one in his file. He lived in a trailer park outside of Glendale. Hennessy called ahead. Bates agreed to meet him at a diner on Grand Avenue. The man who walked in was 74 years old, heavy, with the kind of face that had seen too many truck stop breakfasts. He sat down across from Hennessy and ordered coffee without looking at the menu.
You're the trooper. From back then.
You remember me?
I remember everyone from back then. You don't forget a thing like that.
A thing like what?
Bates stirred his coffee for a long time before answering.
You know what? You were there.
Hennessy pushed his coffee aside.
Your statement in '76 was 6 sentences. You said you arrived at 9 p.m., parked your rig in the back lot, went straight to sleep, heard nothing, saw nothing, left at 5 a.m.
That's what I said.
That's not what happened.
Bates looked out the window at the parking lot. A semi rolled past on Grand Avenue, air brakes hissing.
I gave my statement. I signed it. Far as I'm concerned, that's the truth.
Someone edited my case file, crossed out my own notes. Your interview should have been longer. I know how I worked. 6 sentences isn't how I worked.
Bates turned back to him. The man's hands were shaking slightly, though whether from age or something else, Hennessy couldn't tell.
I got grandkids now, 2 of them. You understand what I'm saying?
No.
Then you're not as smart as I thought you were.
Hennessy drove back to the library and pulled the microfilm for the Arizona Republic, August 1976. Grace Delacroix's disappearance had made page 12 of the Metro section. 1 column inch. Woman missing from Highway Motel. No follow-up stories. He scrolled forward through September, October, November. Nothing. He scrolled backward through July, June, May. On May 17th, he found something. A small item in the business section. Southwest Hospitality Holdings had purchased a motel in Kingman. On June 3rd, another purchase in Yuma. On July 12th, a motor lodge outside of Bisbee. The company had bought 4 Arizona motels in 3 months. All of them on state highways. All of them in remote locations. The Saguaro Motor Court was the 5th. Hennessy wrote down the names and dates. He didn't know what he was looking at yet, but he knew it wasn't coincidence. The Kingman Motel had been torn down in '89. The Yuma property was now a tire shop. The Bisbee Motor Lodge had burned in 1978. Hennessy found the fire report in the county archives. Electrical fault, ruled accidental. No injuries. The property had been vacant at the time. He called the Cochise County Sheriff's Office and asked if anyone remembered the fire. The deputy who answered transferred him to a sergeant named Gutierrez, who'd been on the force since '73.
That fire. Yeah, I remember. We thought it was arson, but the state fire marshal overruled us. Said the wiring was old, could have happened any time.
Did you investigate the owners?
Tried to. Some holding company out of Delaware. Never could get a name. Why are you asking about this now?
Hennessy told him about Grace Delacroix, about the 5 motels, about the edited case file. The line went quiet for a long moment.
You should come down here. There's something you need to see.
The drive to Bisbee took 3 hours. Hennessy met Gutierrez at a coffee shop on Main Street. The sergeant was 62 years old, barrel-chested, with a thick mustache gone gray. He'd brought a folder.
After that fire, we had a John Doe. Found him in a wash about 2 miles from the motel property. Been dead maybe a week when a hiker spotted him.
Connected to the fire?
We thought so, but the ME couldn't determine cause of death. Body was too decomposed. No ID, no missing persons match. We figured transient, exposure, closed it out.
Gutierrez slid a photograph across the table. Black and white, crime scene documentation. A body in a dry creek bed, face down.
Week after we closed it, I got a call from a Phoenix number. Man said he was a lawyer. Said his client might be able to identify the body. I told him to come down, make a statement. He never showed. I tried to call back. Number was disconnected.
What was the lawyer's name?
Harmon. Walter Harmon.
Walter Harmon had been a real estate attorney in Phoenix. Past tense. Hennessy found his obituary in the Republic Archives. Died December 1978, 2 months after the Bisbee fire. Car accident on Interstate 10, single vehicle, no other cars involved. Lost control and rolled into a drainage ditch. The obituary mentioned his firm, Harmon and Associates, and his surviving family. A wife, Carol, and a son, Walter Jr. The firm had dissolved in '79. Carol Harmon had remarried in '81 and moved to San Diego. Hennessy found her number through directory assistance. She hung up when he mentioned her first husband's name. He called back. She hung up again. The third time, he left a message on her machine, explaining who he was and what he was looking for. She called him back at 11 that night.
I'll talk to you once, then you forget my name. Understand?
I understand.
Walter was scared. The last 6 months of his life, he was terrified. He wouldn't tell me of what.
Carol Harmon's voice was steady, practiced, like she'd been waiting decades to say these words to someone who might listen.
Walter handled property transactions. That's all he did. Boring work, he used to say. Then in '76, he got a new client. Big retainer, cash up front. He was excited at first, then he wasn't. He started working late, coming home pale, drinking more than usual.
Did he mention the client's name?
No, but I saw some of the paperwork once. He'd left it on his desk at home. Motel purchases, all over Arizona. I asked him about it. He told me to forget I'd seen it. Said some things were better left alone.
The accident. What do you remember?
The line went quiet. When she spoke again, her voice had changed.
Walter didn't drink and drive. Ever. The police said his blood alcohol was twice the legal limit. I told them it was impossible. They didn't listen.
Did anyone else investigate?
His partner did. For about a week. Then he dropped it. Then he moved to Nevada and never spoke to me again.
The partner's name was Eugene Crane. Hennessy found him in Reno, still practicing law at 71 years old. He agreed to a phone call, but refused to meet in person.
Walter Harmon was my friend. best man at my wedding, and I'm going to tell you exactly what I told Carol in 79. Leave it alone.
A woman disappeared. Your partner died. A motel burned down. Someone's covering something up.
You're retired. You've got no badge, no authority, no protection. Whatever you think you're going to find, you're wrong. And even if you're right, it won't matter. The people involved, they don't lose.
Who are they?
Crane laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound.
You really don't know? After all this time? Walter figured it out too late. That's why he's dead. I figured it out in time. That's why I'm in Reno.
The line went dead. When Hennessy called back, the number had been disconnected. Hennessy went back to the original case file. He'd missed something. He was sure of it now. He read his own interviews again, the ones that hadn't been edited. The traveling salesman from Flagstaff had given a detailed statement. His name was Leonard Pruitt. He'd sold medical supplies. He'd arrived at the Saguaro Motor Court at 3:15 p.m., checked into room 8, gone to the office twice to complain about his air conditioning. The second time was at 6:30 p.m. The manager, Dale Womack, had been on the phone. Pruitt had waited. Womack had seemed agitated, Pruitt said. Kept saying yes, sir, and no, sir, to whoever was on the other end. When he hung up, his hands were shaking. Hennessy had noted this detail and circled it. Then, in the margin, he'd written, "Follow-up, phone records." The note wasn't crossed out, but there were no phone records in the file. Hennessy had never followed up, or someone had made sure he couldn't. Leonard Pruitt had died in 1984. Cancer, according to the Social Security Death Index. But he'd had a wife, Margaret, and she was still alive. Hennessy found her in a nursing home in Scottsdale. She was 86 years old, sharp as a tack, and delighted to have a visitor.
Leonard talked about that night for years, said it was the strangest thing that ever happened to him. A woman disappeared from a motel, and nobody seemed to care.
Did he mention anything specific? Anything that didn't make it into his statement?
He mentioned the truck. Said there was a refrigerated truck parked behind the motel when he arrived. Big thing, unmarked. It was gone by morning.
Hennessy checked his file. No mention of a refrigerated truck. He'd never asked about it. Or someone had made sure the question never appeared.
Leonard tried to tell your people about it. The officer told him it wasn't relevant, told him to stick to what he saw inside the motel.
A refrigerated truck. Hennessy drove home and spread his notes across the kitchen table. 5 motels, all purchased by the same company, all on remote highways. A lawyer who handled the deals dead in a suspicious accident. A John Doe found near one of the properties. A woman who vanished without a trace. A motel manager who sold his business for twice its value and never spoke of it again. And now, a refrigerated truck that no one had bothered to investigate. He poured himself a bourbon and stared at the wall. Refrigerated trucks moved perishables. Food, medicine, biological materials. They also moved things that needed to stay cold for other reasons. Bodies, for instance. Evidence. Contraband that degraded at room temperature. Hennessy thought about the geography. Route 89 connected Phoenix to Flagstaff, then continued north to the Utah border. Route 80 ran east from San Diego through Yuma to Tucson. The motels formed a network. Rest stops on a highway system that went everywhere and nowhere. The next morning, Hennessy called the Arizona Department of Transportation and asked for records of refrigerated truck permits from August 1976. The clerk told him those records had been purged in '85. He called the Arizona Corporation Commission and asked for the original incorporation documents for Southwest Hospitality Holdings. Those had been transferred to the Delaware Secretary of State in '79. He called Delaware. The records were sealed by court order. Hennessy hung up and stared at his phone. Every door he tried was locked. Every trail went cold. Someone had spent decades making sure this story couldn't be told. That meant the story was worth telling. He opened his case file again and found the photograph of Grace Delacroix. Unremarkable face, ordinary woman. She checked into a motel and vanished. 22 years later, no one had explained why. Hennessy made a decision. He was going to find the people who'd stayed at those other motels. Someone had seen something. Someone was still alive. The Kingman Motel had been called the Desert Rest Inn. Hennessy found its old registration records in the Mojave County Historical Society archives. They'd been donated by a local collector who'd salvaged them from a dumpster in '89. The records covered 1974 through '77. Hennessy photographed every page, then spent 3 days cross-referencing names with phone directories and death records. Most of the guests were dead or untraceable, but one name appeared multiple times across several months. A woman named Helen Marsh. She'd stayed at the Desert Rest Inn once a month from April through September of '76. Always for one night. Always paying cash. The pattern stopped in October. Hennessy found a Helen Marsh in the Phoenix White Pages. Same birth year as the one who'd signed those registers. He called the number. A woman answered on the third ring.
Who is this?
Ma'am, my name is Carl Hennessy. I used to be with the Arizona DPS. I'm looking into some old motel records, and your name came up.
The line went silent for a long moment.
I've been waiting 20 years for this call.
Helen Marsh lived in a small house in Maryvale, West Phoenix. She was 70 years old, thin, with nervous hands that never stopped moving. She invited Hennessy inside, but didn't offer him anything to drink. The house was clean but sparse, like someone who'd learned to live without accumulating things.
I worked for the state, Department of Health Services, 1968 through '77. I was a field inspector, restaurants, hotels, food processing plants, anywhere that needed a health certificate.
And the motels?
Someone asked me to inspect them. Off the books. Said they were worried about sanitation issues at some of the highway properties. Wanted an independent assessment before filing a formal complaint.
Who asked you?
She looked at him like he was simple.
I never knew his name. He paid cash. Envelope in my mailbox once a month. $300 to drive out, look around, write a report. I thought I was helping.
What did you find?
Nothing. That's what scared me. Those places were spotless.
Hennessy leaned forward.
Spotless how?
Professionally cleaned. I'm talking hospital-grade sanitation. Bleach, industrial disinfectant, the works. Every surface, every drain, every tile. I'd never seen anything like it in a budget highway motel. These places should have been roach motels. Instead, they were cleaner than operating rooms.
You reported this?
I wrote it in my reports, sent them to a P.O. box in Phoenix. After the 5th one, I got a call. Man's voice, very calm. He thanked me for my work and said my services were no longer required. Said I'd receive a final payment. Said it would be best if I forgot about the whole arrangement.
Did you?
I tried. Then I read about that woman who disappeared from the motel near Tucson. Grace Delacroix. I recognized the name of the property. It was one of the ones I'd inspected.
Her hands stopped moving. She looked at Hennessy with something between fear and relief.
I went to the police. They took my statement. Then, nothing. No follow-up, no investigation. Like I'd never said a word.
Hennessy drove back to the library. He pulled the police blotter records for Phoenix, August through December 1976. Helen Marsh's complaint should have been logged. It wasn't. He checked the county records. Nothing. He checked the state files. Nothing. Her statement had been erased as thoroughly as if it had never existed. He thought about what she'd told him. Professional cleaning. Hospital-grade sanitation. You didn't clean a motel like that unless you were hiding something. Blood, maybe. Or other biological evidence. He thought about the refrigerated truck. About the network of motels on remote highways. About the lawyer who'd died, and the manager who'd sold out, and the woman who'd vanished. A pattern was forming. He couldn't see all of it yet, but he could feel its shape. Something was being transported along those highways. Something that required cold storage and sterile facilities. Something that left traces someone wanted destroyed. The next lead came from an unexpected source. Hennessy's daughter called on Sunday, as she always did. He told her about his investigation, expecting her to tell him he was wasting his time. Instead, she told him about a true crime forum on the internet. People who researched old, unsolved cases. She helped him set up an account. Within a week, he'd posted everything he knew about Grace Delacroix and the Motel network. Within 2 weeks, he had a response. A user named DesertRat47 claimed to have information about Southwest Hospitality Holdings. The company, he said, had been a front for a group of investors with connections to organized crime in California. They'd used the motels as way stations for a smuggling operation that ran from the Mexican border to Las Vegas. But the cargo wasn't drugs. It was something else entirely. Something worse. DesertRat47 agreed to meet Hennessy in person. He said he'd been waiting a long time to tell someone what he knew. DesertRat47's real name was Victor Castellano. He was 64 years old, a retired postal worker who'd spent 30 years delivering mail in small towns along Route 89. He met Hennessy at a rest stop north of Flagstaff, neutral territory. Castellano was a small man with thick glasses and a nervous habit of looking over his shoulder.
In the 70s, I noticed something. Same truck, same route, same schedule. Every 2 weeks, a refrigerated semi would pass through my delivery zone, heading north. No markings, no company name, just white panels and Arizona plates. You followed it once. Curiosity killed the cat, right? It stopped at the Desert Rest Inn in Kingman, backed up to a service entrance I didn't know existed. 2 men unloaded something, couldn't see what. They were fast, professional. The whole thing took maybe 10 minutes. Did you report it? To who? I was a mailman. I delivered letters. I didn't investigate crimes. But I kept watching, and I kept notes.
He handed Hennessy a spiral notebook, yellowed with age. Dates, times, license plates. 30 years of observations. Hennessy studied the notebook for 3 days. Castellano had documented 147 truck sightings over 30 years. The pattern was consistent. Every 2 weeks, northbound from the border. Every 2 weeks, southbound from Nevada. The trucks stopped at the same motels, always for less than an hour. The license plates changed regularly, but the trucks themselves were identical. White refrigerated semis with no markings. In 1978, the pattern shifted. The trucks started using different routes, new motels. The old properties were abandoned or destroyed. Someone had changed the operation. Hennessy cross-referenced the dates with his other research. The shift happened 2 months after Walter Harmon's death. 2 months after the Bisbee fire. Someone had gotten scared. Someone had decided to cover their tracks. But they hadn't stopped. They'd just gotten more careful.
You never told anyone about this? I told one person, a reporter from the Phoenix Gazette. 1982. He was writing about organized crime in Arizona.
What happened?
He died. Car accident. Single vehicle. Lost control on Interstate 10.
Hennessy found the reporter's obituary in the Gazette archives. His name was Michael Rowe, 34 years old, survived by a wife and 2 children. The accident had happened on October 15, 1982. Interstate 10, mile marker 112. Single vehicle, no witnesses. Blood alcohol level, 0.12. Hennessy was starting to recognize the pattern. He called the Gazette and asked if anyone remembered Michael Rowe. The city desk transferred him to an editor named Patricia Lim, who'd worked there since '79.
Mike was one of the best we had. Organised crime beat. He was working on something big when he died. His notes disappeared from the office the day after the accident.
Did anyone investigate?
His editor tried. Got a visit from 2 men in suits who said they were federal agents, showed badges, asked questions, took what was left of Mike's files. We never saw them again. The FBI denied any involvement. DPS said it wasn't their jurisdiction. The whole thing just evaporated.
Do you remember what he was working on?
Something about trucks, shipments crossing the border. He never told me the details. Said it was safer if I didn't know.
Hennessy drove to the Arizona State Archives and requested the DPS incident reports for October 1982. Michael Rowe's accident was logged on page 47. Single vehicle rollover, driver deceased at scene. Blood alcohol level consistent with impairment. The investigating officer's name was familiar. Sergeant William Delacroix. Hennessy read the name 3 times before it registered. Delacroix. The same surname as Grace. He pulled the original missing persons file and checked her emergency contact. A brother in California named William. He checked the DPS personnel records for '76. William Delacroix had been a patrol officer stationed in Tucson. He'd been promoted to sergeant in '79 and transferred to Phoenix. He'd investigated his own sister's disappearance. And he'd investigated the death of a reporter looking into the same smuggling operation. Hennessy felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd found the connection. Now he needed to find William Delacroix. William Delacroix had retired from DPS in 1994. 30 years of service, commendations, promotions. A model officer. He'd moved to a property outside of Kingman after retirement. Hennessy found the address in the county assessor's records. It was a ranch, 40 acres, purchased in '85. The same year the Desert Rest Inn had been torn down. The same town where his sister had stayed once a month in '76. Hennessy didn't call ahead. He drove to Kingman on a Thursday morning and parked outside the ranch gates. A long dirt driveway led to a low adobe house. Behind it, he could see a barn and several outbuildings. The property was well maintained, expensive, more expensive than a state trooper's pension could afford. He sat in his car for an hour, watching. A man came out of the house around noon, tall, gray-haired, moving with the careful precision of someone who'd spent his life in uniform. He got into a pickup truck and drove toward the gate. Hennessy stepped out of his car. William Delacroix stopped his truck at the gate and rolled down the window. He was 73 years old, still fit, with eyes that had seen things they'd learned not to acknowledge.
Help you?
My name's Carl Hennessy. I used to be DPS. I investigated your sister's disappearance in '76.
The man's face didn't change, not a flicker.
Grace left. She went to California to start over. That's what the file says.
The file says a lot of things. Most of them aren't true. You know that. You helped make them not true.
You should go home, Mr. Hennessy. You're a long way from Phoenix. Long way from anyone who'd hear you if something happened.
Is that a threat?
It's advice. From one retired trooper to another. Some cases stay closed for good reasons. Grace's case is closed. The reporter's case is closed. Walter Harmon's case is closed. You want to join them?
Hennessy didn't answer. Delacroix smiled, thin and cold.
I didn't think so.
Hennessy drove back to Phoenix. He didn't stop until he reached his house. He locked the doors, closed the blinds, and sat in his kitchen with his case file spread across the table. William Delacroix had confirmed everything without saying a word. The brother had been involved. The missing woman, the dead lawyer, the dead reporter, all connected to a smuggling operation that ran through Arizona's highway motels. But Delacroix was just a piece. Someone bigger was running this. Someone with enough power to bury investigations, falsify death certificates, and buy off state troopers for 30 years. Hennessy looked at his notes. The corporation in Delaware, the federal agents who weren't federal agents, the motels that disappeared, the trucks that kept running. He needed more. He needed proof, and he knew where to find it. The one place no one had thought to look. The Saguaro Motor Court had been torn down, but concrete foundations didn't disappear. Whatever had happened there might still be buried underneath. Hennessy rented a ground-penetrating radar unit from a construction supply company. The technician asked what he was looking for. Hennessy said he was checking for old septic tanks before a building project. The lie came easily. He drove back to mile marker 77 on a Saturday morning when the gas station was closed. The concrete slab where the motel had stood was cracked now, weeds pushing through. He spent 4 hours scanning the ground in a grid pattern. Most of the readings were normal: soil, rocks, old pipes. But in one section, near where room 12 would have been, the radar showed something else. A void space. Approximately 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, 4 feet deep. The dimensions of a grave. Hennessy marked the spot with spray paint and drove to the nearest hardware store. He bought a shovel, a pickaxe, and a flashlight. Then he drove back to the slab and started digging. The concrete was old and brittle. It broke apart under the pickaxe, revealing compacted soil beneath. Hennessy dug through the evening, stopping only to drink water and wipe the sweat from his eyes. At 9 p.m., his shovel struck something solid. He cleared the dirt away with his hands. It was a metal container. A steel lockbox, rusted but intact, buried approximately 3 feet below the original foundation. Someone had put this here before the motel was built. Or during construction, when fresh concrete would hide any evidence of digging. Hennessy lifted the box out of the hole. It was heavy, maybe 15 pounds. The lock had corroded shut. He used the pickaxe to break it open. Inside were documents: shipping manifests, financial records, photographs. And beneath them, wrapped in plastic, a 9mm handgun with the serial number filed off. Hennessy spread the documents across his kitchen table and began reading. The shipping manifests listed cargo as medical supplies, destination clinics throughout Nevada and California. But the weights didn't match. The shipments were too heavy for bandages and syringes. The financial records showed payments from Southwest Hospitality Holdings to a company called Western Medical Transport. The same amounts, the same dates, the same pattern Victor Castellano had documented in his notebook. The photographs were the proof Hennessy had been looking for. Black and white, poorly lit, taken with a cheap camera. They showed the interior of a refrigerated truck. Stacked inside were not medical supplies, but human organs. Hearts, livers, kidneys, preserved in ice and medical containers. The motel network wasn't smuggling drugs. It was smuggling body parts.
My God!
At the bottom of the stack was one more photograph. A woman, unconscious, strapped to a gurney in what looked like a motel bathroom. The face was partially obscured, but Hennessy recognized her. Grace Ann Delacroix. Hennessy sat in his kitchen until 3 in the morning, piecing together the full picture. The motels were harvesting stations. Travelers who wouldn't be missed, drifters, runaways, people starting over, checked in and never checked out. Their organs were removed in the spotlessly clean bathrooms Helen Marsh had inspected, packed in ice, and transported to buyers in Las Vegas and California. The operation had run for years, maybe decades. Walter Harmon had discovered what he was facilitating and tried to get out. They killed him. Michael Rowe had gotten too close. They killed him too. And William Delacroix, Grace's own brother, had been part of it from the beginning. He hadn't investigated his sister's disappearance. He'd helped cover it up. Hennessy looked at the photograph of Grace on the gurney. She hadn't disappeared. She'd been murdered for her organs, and her brother had made sure no one ever found out.
22 years. They got away with it for 22 years.
He picked up his phone and dialed the FBI field office in Phoenix. The FBI agent who arrived at Hennessy's house the next morning was named Special Agent Barbara Walsh, no relation. She was 42 years old, with the kind of patient skepticism that came from years of listening to conspiracy theories. Hennessy showed her everything: the case file, the documents from the lockbox, the photographs, Victor Castellano's notebook. He explained the network, the timeline, the deaths. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment.
This is substantial, if it's authentic.
It's authentic. I dug that box out of the ground myself.
The problem is chain of custody. You're a retired state trooper with a personal connection to the case. A defense attorney would have a field day.
So what do we do?
We need a witness, someone who participated in the operation and is willing to testify. Without that, all we have is circumstantial evidence and the word of a man who's been obsessing over a 20-year-old case.
Hennessy thought about William Delacroix, about the threat at the ranch gate.
I know where to find one.
They drove to Kingman together. Walsh brought 2 other agents and a warrant based on the evidence Hennessy had provided. The ranch gate was open when they arrived. The pickup truck was gone. They found the house empty, stripped of anything personal. Closets bare, drawers pulled out, file cabinets cleaned. William Delacroix had run, but he'd left something behind. In the barn, under a tarp, they found a refrigerated panel truck. White, unmarked, Arizona plates. The interior had been cleaned with bleach, but luminol testing revealed traces of blood on the floor and walls. Type O negative, type A positive, type B positive. Multiple donors. Walsh called for a forensics team. Hennessy walked the property alone, trying to understand how a man could do this to his own sister. In an outbuilding behind the barn, he found the answer. Medical equipment, surgical lights, an operating table with restraints, and on the wall, a schedule. Dates, initials, destinations. The last entry was August 14th, 1976. GD to Las Vegas. The FBI found William Delacroix 3 days later. He'd made it to Mexico, then tried to cross back through a different checkpoint using a fake passport. The border agents recognized him from the alert. He didn't resist arrest. He didn't say anything at all until he was in an interrogation room in Phoenix with Walsh and 2 other agents. Hennessy watched through the one-way glass.
We have the truck, we have the surgical equipment, we have shipping manifests with your signature, we have photographs of your sister on a gurney in one of your motels. This is your chance to tell us who else was involved.
Delacroix sat perfectly still, hands folded on the table.
I want immunity.
That depends on what you give us.
I can give you the buyers, the surgeons, the people who funded the whole operation, names, dates, account numbers, everything.
And your sister?
For the first time, something flickered across his face.
Grace found out. She was going to talk. I didn't have a choice.
William Delacroix gave them everything. The operation had been running since 1971, funded by a consortium of wealthy patients in California and Nevada who needed organs faster than the legal system could provide. The surgeons were legitimate doctors moonlighting for cash. The buyers were businessmen, politicians, celebrities, people whose names would never appear in any official record. The motels were chosen for their isolation. The victims were chosen for their anonymity. Over 25 years, the network had harvested organs from an estimated 200 people. Most of the bodies had never been found. Grace Delacroix had been a bookkeeper for Western Medical Transport. She'd figured out what the shipments actually contained and threatened to go to the police. Her brother had volunteered to handle her. Hennessy listened to every word through the glass. When Delacroix finished, Walsh looked directly at the observation window.
We got them. All of them.
Hennessy nodded, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like a door finally closing on 22 years of unanswered questions. The arrests came in waves. 47 people in 3 states, including 12 doctors, 6 hospital administrators, and a retired Nevada state senator. The trial lasted 8 months. Hennessy testified for 3 days, walking the jury through his investigation step by step. Victor Castellano testified about the trucks. Helen Marsh testified about the clean motels. Patricia Lim testified about Michael Rowe's investigation. Linda Womack testified about her husband's fear. The evidence from the lockbox was admitted after forensic analysis confirmed its authenticity. The photographs were shown to the jury in closed session. 2 jurors had to be excused. William Delacroix received a reduced sentence in exchange for his testimony. 20 years, eligible for parole in 12. Grace Delacroix's remains were never found. The FBI believed she'd been cremated at a facility in Las Vegas that had since been demolished. Her sister June attended every day of the trial. She never spoke to Hennessy, but on the last day she nodded to him across the courtroom.